All right, we're live. So today's class, we're going to go over middle game planning. This is something that you guys voted on in the YouTube community poll. We had 5 different choices. Middle game planning had over 30% of the votes. And we did a middle game class back in August. But this one's completely different. So we have all new examples, and it's going to be a little bit different flavor of middle game planning than the last one that we did. So let's start with what we usually do in the live streams. Just let me know your name and where you're from in the chat. So we're going to keep this very interactive with the chat. I want it to feel kind of like a live in-person lesson where you guys can give feedback, ask questions. And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and make sure to answer any of those questions. So most of you, I think I've seen before who are in the chat, but let's see who we got here today. Okay, we got Sharon from San Jose, California. Dennis from Rochester. PD Rath, let me know if you do see the live stream now. We have Christian from Germany. Killian from Vienna. Ethan also from Rochester. 2 players from the Rochester Chess Club. Carlos from Brazil. Echo Estix from the Netherlands. Vibhob Sir from India. Brock from Wisconsin or Nashville. Good to see everybody. Michael, San Francisco. Good to see you, Michael. Michael, I've seen you highlighted on the Chess Simple YouTube channel as well. Steve from Fort Lauderdale. Hey, we got a Canadian, Smithy Q, checking in the background. Uniter Zero from the Philippines. Ian from the Cayman Islands. That's awesome. Welcome, everybody. Second question that I always just like to hear, where did you guys first learn about ChessGoals? So put that answer in the chat. Was it from YouTube, which seems to be pretty common on the live streams? Was it from the rating comparisons? Was it from a podcast? Did you hear from word of mouth? I'd like to know where you guys first found out about ChessGoals. Oh, Michael said Go Mechanics Institute in San Francisco. Yeah, I've heard a lot about that club. It'd be fun to visit. And Matt is here from Maryland. Hey, Christian says from YouTube, and I'm laughing at Matt Markland, who's from Rochester as well. It's 3 Rochester people in the chat. Heard about it from me. YouTube, rating comparison, YouTube, Smithy's Minis course. Yeah, Smithy Q has a miniature course called Smithy's Minis. I can't even say it on the ChessGoals site. Yeah, Matt, I was on the Chess Journeys podcast for 1 episode. YouTube podcast, Dane Matson. Awesome, awesome. All right. So I have a few slides for you guys. And these are slides that I've been doing every live stream, and I just tweak them a little bit just to kind of give new people an idea about ChessGoals, what we do at ChessGoals, who I am, and kind of what our goals are as a company. All right, so welcome to ChessGoals. My name is Matt Jensen. I started chess when I was 5. I've been coaching chess since I was 10. 3-time Minnesota high school champion. That was kind of like the prime of my career. That's why I list that here. After that, it's all been downhill. I currently work in statistics as my day job, and I do chess stuff on the side. And at age 29, I became a national master. So I started pushing for the NM title around age 24 or 25, and I was able to get there at age 29. All right, so about ChessGoals. So ChessGoals started with a survey of over 400 entries. And this kind of goes back to my stats background. I really like data and combining data in chess. From those 400 entries, we created study plans, and those are now on the website. The course is called the ChessGoals Blueprint, and you can download study plans that give you 12 weeks of every single day, what to check off for different activities. So all you have to do is focus on doing your chess every day, and the study plan tells you exactly what to work on. So it's supposed to be a very efficient way based on that survey data of what worked for other players to help you form a nice study plan. And that survey also, I should mention, that survey asks questions like how many hours a week do you spend on playing blitz, bullet, rapid, classical, over the board, studying tactics, studying endgame, studying strategy. So I had all this data on how people studied. And then I had their start ratings, and then I had their ratings 1 year ago. And I mapped the training methods to the amount of rating gain. And then I created these study plans based on different rating bands, and they're approximately 300-point rating bands. So check that out if you haven't, ChessGoals Blueprint. Our community now has over 3,000 students, which is really awesome. And it's just cool to see that it started so small and now we have over 3,000 students. 17 courses. Support, we're helping students every single day, both in Discord, email. Sometimes people contact me through the WhatsApp chat. So that's a big part of ChessGoals is support. And our goal at ChessGoals is to help you guys improve. That's the big goal. And why did we start ChessGoals? Impact, help as many students as possible. Efficiency, keep you guys focused on your chess goals. Analytics, so using data to drive the decisions we make whenever possible. And guidance, having a community and multiple coaches that will help you out. Smithy Q, who's in the chat, is really awesome in our Discord server. So if you enroll in the Smithy's Minis course or any of the paid ChessGoals courses, you get access to our Discord server. Smithy Q is awesome at helping people out. All right, here's today's agenda. We did our introductions. We did meet Matt and what is ChessGoals. Now we're going to jump into the interactive lesson. And then at the end, I do have a special promotion. And if you've seen the other live streams, this is a little bit different of a promotion than the previous ones because I have a new offer to tack on to it. It's a giveaway. So stay tuned for that. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. All right, so we got a couple slides and then we'll jump into the games. So first, this is an eval chart. I drew this one on my own, so it's a little bit ugly looking compared to what you see on chess.com. But essentially, the game starts here and white has a very small advantage. And this is in terms of a stockfish evaluation. Stockfish evaluation is approximately the number of pawns that one side is ahead or behind. So +1 is supposed to be 1 pawn ahead. I will add a qualifier to that. I think if you go back to like the early engines of, let's say, the 90s, maybe the 2000s, a 1 pawn advantage, according to, let's say, Fritz, was approximately 1 pawn for human versus human play. I think now, though, a stockfish eval of +1 for club level players is probably about half a pawn. So I like to tell people, take whatever Stockfish 16 says, cut that in half if you really want to think about it in terms of pawns. Like quite often you want to cut it in half. If you're a GM, though, maybe you could use the full Stockfish eval. So the game starts around point 3, and then throughout the game, as the game goes on, we move to the right, this eval fluctuates, right? It goes up and down. Maybe black gets the advantage here, white gets the advantage back, and eventually white wins. So the next thing we want to think about are imbalances. If you have the book, Silman's Reassess Your Chess, that's a great book to talk about imbalances. I know some people really love the book and some people really dislike the book. But if you kind of put aside the verbiage and things, I think the content is really good. I think about every position in terms of imbalances, and we're going to talk about that a lot in today's lesson. And here are some of the different imbalance things that we need to think about. Superior minor pieces, pawn structure, space, material, key files or squares, who leads in development. Number 7 is very important, playing for the initiative, who controls the pace of the game. Now, here's where this stuff comes into play. Each position has an eval, and that's this red horizontal line, right? So for example, this is one position, this is a separate position, this is a separate position. Let's take this first position. The eval here is slightly above the draw line. The draw line would be 0.00 eval. So maybe this eval is 0.1. The blue bar is the complexity. This is the odds of a mistake. And the way that you can figure out the complexity of a position is looking at those imbalances, trying to dissect all the little things in a position. And then you can start to learn, when is a position more complicated for yourself and when is it more complicated for your opponent? So what you want to do when you have a position where you're winning, let's say this eval is +8. You're up 8 points according to Stockfish. You're very close to just winning the game. When you're winning, you want this complexity bar, this vertical bar, to be very small. You want a simple path to victory. And when you're losing, you want a very wide complexity bar. That means the position just gets wild, it's crazy. There's a high chance for both sides to make mistakes. Because really, when you're down here, when it's a -6 eval, let's say, you have nothing to lose, right? If it's a -6 and the position is very concrete, simple, no tough decisions for your opponent, they're just going to cruise to victory. That -6 is just going to go right down to black winning the game, your opponent winning the game, I should say. So what you want to do when you're losing is make the position as messy as possible. I'm going to pause here briefly. Let me know in the chat, does that make sense? Or do you have any questions about that? Because this is a great way to think about different positions. And I'm going to kick over to the analysis board. So before we go into the first game, make sure you don't have any questions on that. All right, crystal clear, makes sense, makes sense, makes sense, makes sense. Awesome, awesome. When losing, go nuclear. When winning, go safe. Good. And I want you guys to think about that every time you play a game. This is something that I think strong players will naturally do. A perfect example is I've played Andrew Tang multiple times in classical games, much higher rated than me. I've had some really good positions against him in USCF Classical. Every time he makes the position so messy, and within the next 5 to 10 moves, I'm lost. Like, I just can't keep up with his calculation skills, and the messiness increases my chances to blunder. I'm good at simple, solid positions where I can convert those wins. Is there any good resource about evaluating a position? I don't know of a great resource for that, but that's something that I'd be interested in doing more content on. I do have a YouTube video. Maybe someone could find the link, or we could look at it later. It's called the Imbalance Scorecard. So look that up later on the ChessGoals YouTube channel. Imbalance Scorecard, that can help you with evaluating positions. Wayward Chess says, should I try to close the center and stuff when I'm attacking to make it easier? Either close the position or sometimes look for trades. So a lot of people say look for even trades as a way to simplify things. That's usually the best method. But closing the position can help as well. Yep, that's exactly right, Titus. Losing equals complicate, winning equals simplify. All right, so now we're on the first game of the lesson. This is going to be middle game planning. We have Smyslov with the white pieces, Kiers with the black pieces. And let's just go through this opening real quickly to get to move 10. So we have a Queen's Gambit declined. And now this transposes into a triangle structure. Takes, takes, bishop d3, bishop e7, knight f3, castle. All these are pretty standard moves. And then we reach this position. So look at the pawn structure and let me know in the chat, do you know the name of this pawn structure? And it's not always critical to know the names of things. Like, you don't have to necessarily know the names of all the openings in chess. But sometimes it's nice to have a name applied to something, because then it can help our brains remember and link to other times that we've seen the same things in chess. Yep, you guys got it right. Carlsbad structure. All right, next, put in the chat, what are the different imbalances? Just start listing them out. What imbalances favor white? What imbalances favor black? And we'll just kind of talk through this position before we decide on a plan. So think about those imbalances that we listed in the slideshow. Superior pieces, pawn structure, space, material count, control of key files or squares, lead in development, initiative, can be pawn structure. Okay, Wayward Chess says we got 2 pawns on the queen side versus 3 for the opponent. That's very important. Ethan is saying we have more developed pieces. That's true. We got this bishop already out. We have 3 pieces on the 3rd rank, and blacks are kind of cramped back here. Only 1 piece on their 3rd rank. White has this extra center pawn. That's right. Yeah, so you guys are spot on. So we have a more active position, black's a little bit more passive, and the Stockfish eval here is right around 0.5. So it's based on those things that you guys are mentioning. Now, next, let's talk about plans for white. What should our plan be in this position? So put those answers in the chat. What would you do here? It can either be specific moves or it can be high level. Okay, Dennis says minority attack. Thomas also says minority attack. And a minority attack is when you take the 2 pawns on the queen side and you try to push them to trade off for the 3 pawns that your opponent has on the queen side. And the idea with the minority attack is you try to trade off these 2 pawns, typically for 2 of the opponent's pawns, leaving them with just 1 pawn in the end. And this pawn actually becomes weak because it has no pawns that can defend it, and it's going to be on this half-open c-file. So minority attack, that's a great answer. And also Titus is correct. Sometimes you can play f3, e4. And Titus also mentioned, yeah, you could play knight e5 and f4. And we're going to look at one of those positions, Titus. That's called like the Pillsbury attack. Kind of common in the London opening. We'll look at that down the line as well. So minority attack, exactly right. So in the game, Smyslov plays rook a to b1, preparing pawn to b4, which is currently guarded by the bishop. Kyrgyz plays knight g6. Now we see b4 by Smyslov, immediately trying to trade off this b pawn for black c pawn. White wants to play pawn to b5, and then the remaining pawn will become weak for black. Bishop to d6 played. Pawn to b5. The plan is going well. And here, black makes a mistake. Maybe an inaccuracy, somewhere in that range. Inaccuracy or mistake. I made it an inaccuracy symbol on chess.com. The bishop to d7 was played. And my question here for you guys now is, if you're playing the black side, what's the best move? So put your answer in the chat. What's the best move here for black? There's only one move that keeps it close to equal. And this is something that modern engines have figured out. So if we think of some of the kind of classic chess books on strategy, some of that information has become outdated with modern engines. And one of the things with the minority attack that people used to assume is that if the side executing the minority attack gets this position already where these pawns are about to trade off, that it should be much better for white in this position. But actually, there's a plan here for black that can dynamically fight against the minority attack, and the position is pretty much balanced. So no one has said the answer yet, but there's one move here for black that can hold the balance. White's plan is to fight on the queen side. Black's plan should be to fight on the king side. So there's a hint. Black wants to fight on the king side. We'll see if anyone can get this. Titus, that's correct. Pawn to h6. So, yep, Chess Simple, you got it as well. So this bishop doesn't have the option of retreating. It needs to capture. The queen takes back. And now let's say white goes for this trade. In this position, black is threatening bishop to g4 or pawn to c5. And this is actually a dynamically balanced position. Even though white has achieved everything they want in the minority attack, and I still recommend that you guys do this from the white side in this kind of position, go for that minority attack. You can also remember this from the flip side. If you're playing black here, this is your way to fight back against the minority attack. Play on the king side and play dynamically. Look for c5, look for bishop g4 here. So you can still fight back and hold close to equality. All right, so let's see what happened in the game. Bishop to d7 played, guarding this pawn. B takes c6, bishop takes c6, and here's the next quiz question. What's the best move here for white? And there's a couple strong moves, but one of them stands out, and the top move gives you a +1 eval already from the white side. So depending on your rating level, up to 1 pawn advantage already for white in this position. And we're only on move 15. So put your answers in the chat. Best move for white. Wayward chess, bishop to b5. Titus says knight to b5. Okay, knight to b5. Kicking the bishop. Bishop to b5, chess simple. Dennis says bring the rook over to c1. Duhonk says knight to b5. Kicking the bishop. Knight to b5 is the third best move, and it's still a 0.6 eval. h4 is move number 2. That's a 0.7 eval. No one has mentioned the top move yet. It's a queen move. There's a hint. There's a strong queen move here. And what we want to do is utilize the fact that we have this f6 knight pinned to the queen, and that knight is trying to defend this pawn, which our knight currently attacks. So we can add pressure to this pawn on d5. The top move, yep, Thomas just got it. Queen to b3. Queen to b3, adding a second attacker to that weak pawn on d5. So when we go back to imbalances, I like to look at what are the weakest pawns on the board for each side. Black's weakest pawn, to me, is pretty obvious, the pawn on d5. Second weakest pawn, probably the pawn on b7, just because we have rook and queen lined up with it. What's our weakest pawn? Maybe the pawn on a2? We really don't have any pawn weaknesses. So this is what we want to do. We want to apply pressure to those weak points in our opponent's structure. So queen b3. And now the threat is bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and then knight takes d5. Or bishop takes, and if the g pawn takes, now we don't want to try to win this pawn because there is that little trick. Bishop takes h2 check in the end, and our queen would drop. But after bishop f6, g f6, this pawn structure is so ugly for black. Doubled f pawns that are isolated, h pawn, isolated d pawn, that's going to just be a terrible position long term. So after queen b3, black goes bishop back to e7. Oh, I see a question about the recapture. The pawn capture here, Michael, is probably a little bit better than the bishop capture. So that's a great question. Pawn capture is 0.6 for white. The bishop capture is 0.9 for white. So bishop e7 played in the game, breaking this pin. And now Smyslov plays bishop takes f6, removing that defender of the d pawn. Bishop takes back. And now bishop to b5. This is a cool move, and this is a move that didn't come naturally to me. But once you see it, you realize the idea. We want to simply trade off another defender of this d pawn, and we want to weaken the structure on the queen side for black. So right now, even though these are the weakest pawns, that bishop is sort of acting like a pawn, and it's keeping everything defended. It's better than a pawn because it guards b7 as well. So we target this bishop, and we're really just playing for the queen side weaknesses here. Queen d6. And now this is good to note. We have bishop tension here. So a lot of times we talk about pawn tension, and Smithy Q has an awesome video on our YouTube channel about pawn tension. This is bishop tension. The two bishops attack each other, and both sides need to think about, when do I trade bishops and when do I not trade bishops? Black does not want to trade bishops because then these two pawns become extremely weak, and white can wait to trade. So a lot of times you want to wait to relieve tension if it favors you. And in this position, it favors us. Black does not want to take us, so we're not in a hurry to take on c6. We can improve our position first. And we're going to go back to Dennis's idea from earlier, putting the rook that's not in the game on the open c file. So we're going to build up pressure. And I talk about pressure all the time, but when you have your opponent in a tough spot with weaknesses, pressure is a great way to make them crack. So we're going to play rook fc1, adding pressure down the c file. Black has the right idea. They're going for some counterplay. h5, knight e2, h4. And now with that knight moved to e2, bishop takes c6 finally. B takes back. And now queen a4. So here we see a double attack on this pawn. The queen also eyes this pawn. So black is on the defensive. And going back to our imbalances, we have the initiative here. We're making black react to our threats. So black plays knight to e7 to defend the pawn. Rook to b7. And the eval here is 1.4 for white. Rook takes a7 is threatened. And in another 20 moves, Smyslov wins this game. And we're not going to go through the end of the game, but I think this is a great example of showing how nicely you can get a position out of the minority attack. We were able to trade off our b pawn for black's b pawn, sort of that textbook minority attack position in the end with the weakness on c6. And this is going to crumble for black. One more thing to note. If this a pawn moves, you have a cool prophylactic move here as white. Pawn to h3 was played in the game. So a5 and h3 were both played. This slows down the counterplay that black was trying to generate. And now we can work on the queen side next and play something like rook c5 and probably pick off that pawn very shortly. Yes, Mindy Hugh, good point. So black has much less play in this position than in that h6 line that we looked at. All right, we're going to game number 2. This one we have Botvinnik with the white pieces, and it's an English opening. And we reach this position. Botvinnik with the white pieces. Does anyone know what this pawn structure is called for white? Put your answers in the chat if you know. Or take a wild guess. It might be fun to see your guesses. Yep, that's right. Botvinnik pawn structure. Botvinnik played the Botvinnik. That's exactly right, guys. Just Simple says the Tony Costin Express. If wayward chess, the pointy structure. Yeah, so Stonewall, if the colors were reversed and this pawn were back, that's a Dutch Stonewall. Usually with the Stonewall, though, you don't want the pawn on g3. You typically don't see that. But it's close to a Stonewall. Oh, also, I should mention, usually the Stonewall, the pawns are slid over. D pawn, E pawn, F pawn. But this one's in particular, this whole setup for white, if you just look at the first 4 ranks, this is called the Botvinnik structure. And kind of a cool thing with the Botvinnik structure is you can play this same sort of system almost no matter what black does. So there are some system players that will play Botvinnik structure every single game. It can have good results with it. And I know Chess Simple's in the chat. I remember there was a time when Dane Matson was playing quite a few Botvinnik structures, and he had really good results with the white pieces because he just had such a good feel for these positions. So now let's talk about the imbalances. List the imbalances in the chat. What are we looking at here? It's a 0.7 eval, by the way, for white. So these imbalances are definitely favoring white in this position. See what you guys think. space advantage for white. Yeah, this C pawn is giving us some extra space for sure. Some of the pieces are symmetric though, like D and E pawns. King sides are pretty close. Potential weak squares, yes. Yeah, Dennis, that's exactly right. White is ready to play a pawn to f4. Or on the queen side, yes. So going back to the space that Chess Simple mentioned, white has more space not only in the current position, but white is about to have even more space than currently by playing b4 or pawn to f4. So both b4 and f4 are super strong in this position to expand our space and use that imbalance to push for a win. So the best move here, which is played in the game, is pawn to f4. And black does not really want to take this pawn because the g pawn takes back. And then white has 4 pawns on the 4th rank, and black would have no pawns on the 5th rank. So even though the engine doesn't complain too much about taking compared to other moves, optically it's a really nice space position for white with all of these pawns on the 4th. So in the game, black plays c6. And what he wants to do here is he wants to play pawn to d5 after pawn to f5 is played. So for example, if white goes f5 immediately, that's an inaccuracy after d5. So kind of think back to our last example, how when your position is worse, you want to fight for counterplay. Black was a little bit worse in that Carlsbad structure if they just let it happen the way it played out in the game. So black should have played h6 and had queen takes f6, played for counterplay. In this position, black is going to be a lot worse if he just sits back and does nothing. So he needs to fight for counterplay. He can go d5 here, and this is only a small advantage for white. So we have better in this position. The strongest move is actually pawn to h3. And I like moves like this because at first glance you think, well, that just seems slow. Why not develop something else? Well, what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, you don't have access to this g4 square. There's no bishop g4. There's no knight g4. And there's actually no good moves for black. So for example, let's say you play bishop to e6. Well, that makes f5 even stronger, kicking the bishop with a tempo. If you play, for example, pawn to a6, there's also f5. And in this d5 line, we can go c takes d, b4. And now things just got awkward for black because the knight doesn't have the a6 square. There's no other open squares except d7, and now this d pawn drops. So in the current position after h3, there's no good moves for black. So in the game, black plays knight to e6, and now white strikes with pawn to f5. Pawn to f5, kicking the knight, and now black does not want to take. For example, takes, because this kingside structure becomes very weak. There's no g-pawn for black. So he moves the knight. And now here's the quiz for you guys. What's the best move in this position for white? How do we increase this advantage? We're at around a 0.9 eval, so close to a full pawn at high levels. Michael's saying wouldn't capture on f4 with the pawn rather than the knight destroy white's king safety. Yeah, so SmithyQ makes a good point. This is something that I've only recently kind of appreciated. King safety is not just about the pawns, it's also about the pieces around your king. So even though like in this position, white has no pawns on the 2nd rank, g4 is the top move here. Thomas got it right. Because what we're doing is we're expanding our space on the king side, and the number of defending pieces we have around our king, for example, the knight, the rook, the bishop, the queen's nearby, outnumbers the number of attacking pieces that black has that can easily access our king position. Like this knight is probably the only real threat. This guy is lingering, but the problem is he won't have any squares once our pawn is up on g4. So our king is pretty safe here. But g4 is the plan. We want to play g4 and expand. And the threat here is really cool. We would like to play g5 kicking the knight, and then pawn to f6, which would force that bishop back to h8, and it would be completely stuck for the rest of the game. That's a massive threat. So in the game, black plays knight back to e8, bishop to e3, pawn to a6, going for some queenside counterplay. Black needs to find a pawn break here. Queen to d2, b5, and now we see this subtle move by white. This is a really strong idea. Bishop to g5, poking at the queen. And the problem now for black is they want to avoid pawn to f6 like we just talked about. So if the queen moves away, pawn to f6 is super strong. And if black plays bishop to f6, that's the top move, and that's what was played in the game. Now white plays bishop takes f6, removing the defender of the dark squares. And this kind of hits on your question, Michael. Isn't the same thing true for black? Yes, it is. Black does have a lot of defenders around the king right now, more than white has attackers. But this is where the space comes into play. Because white has more space, we can start to maneuver our pieces side to side much more easily than black can. So that's how we're going to use our space advantage in this position. So we're not winning. Black is still holding the king side for now, and probably stockfish against stockfish. This is probably still going to be a draw. Like, very best play. Black's probably still holding this. But we're at a 1.3 eval, and black's position is slowly slipping, and we're going to be able to shift things over to the king side. So we take f6, eliminating that defender of the dark squares. Knight takes back. Knight takes d4. E takes d. And now look at this. Knight e2. So our knight's shifting over to the king side. Queen b6. C takes b. A takes b. And now here's another quiz for you guys. And this game ends in 4 more moves. But put your answers in the chat. What is the best move for white in this position? Yeah, the interaction between space and king safety. YouTube video idea. I kind of like it. What should white do here? Well, we can look at that next, Ethan. Take him back with the queen. So see a few g5s. I'm actually kind of curious what the eval is on g5. Queen h6. Thomas and Tim, that's the answer. Queen h6 is the top move. It's a 4.5 eval. Pawn to g5, surprisingly, after knight d7, is only a 0.9. And it looks like black is getting some counterplay with knight e5, because as long as black can avoid getting mated, like as long as they have a way to stop this, and queen here, they'll do okay. And it looks like there's a surprising move, pawn to h5 here. And now there's no way, even after this, there's no way for us to get our queen to g7. So that was a great question. Could we have played g5 there? But it looks like black is doing pretty well, or close to equal. Queen h6 top move. But let's go back just real quick and look at the recapture that Ethan was wondering about. Queen takes f6 here. Yeah, it's actually about the same eval, Ethan, as knight takes. So it's not a bad move at all. But we will probably still look to harass the queen, I'm guessing. At some point playing g5 and trying to open the position up. Okay, so let's go back to the game. Queen h6, top move. Bishop to d7 played. Now white goes g5, kicking the knight. The knight moves. And here we see knight to f4, attacking this guy and threatening f6, queen g7 mate. Black played knight to g7, f6, and this is a checkmate in 8 moves. Knight to e8 is the top reply. And this, if someone gets this quiz question right, you're a tactical genius. But what is the best move here? What's the only move here that gives you a forced mate sequence? There are a lot of moves where white is still completely winning, but there's one move here that's a forced mate sequence. Put your answer in the chat. It's a checkmate in 8 moves. I was so shocked when I saw this. Dennis says knight h5. Wayward Chess says knight takes g6. Thomas says knight d5 with the rook at f4 lift idea. One of those answers is correct. And the answer is knight to d5. And the idea is rook lift, f4, h4. So we don't care that black takes the knight. We simply move our rook up. The best move for black here is bishop g4. We take, and then the best move for black is rook takes a2. We can ignore that. Best move is to win our rook. And now all black can do is sacrifice the house. Sacrifice, sacrifice, make a waiting move, and get mated. What an attack. So this all came out of this position right here, knowing this plan. f5, g4, g5, and attack kingside. This comes out of the Botvinnik setup, and we see these pawns, d3 and e4, kind of pointing up towards black's kingside. That's the way that we can initiate the attack, with those pawns pointing towards black's king. All right, let's go to game number 3. And a lot of these games are going to build off each other. This one we're going to want to start on move 22, so I'm not going to go through the beginning moves. Okay, so right here, white plays pawn to e4. And this is a new theme. This comes from a book that I've been training on, Chessable. The idea here is white has a pawn structure with a fianchetto and a pawn on e4. Oh, I'm blanking out on the name of the book. I feel like it's critical to say. This is called the extended triangle. So have you guys seen this position, seen this structure before, the extended triangle? The book is called Techniques of Positional Play. I had to look it up. This is called the extended triangle. What we want to do here is figure out from the black side, what's the key theme in this position? Let me know in the chat. Do you have a key theme in mind from the black side to fight against this extended triangle? And this is one that really surprised me because I've thought about this extended triangle before in different positions, but I never put a name to it. And I didn't always have a great, concrete plan of how to crack the extended triangle. Chess Simple is saying f5. I think you probably mean f4. Ethan is saying c4. Smithy Q says f4 and knight to h5. Tim is saying focus on the e-pawn weakness. Wayward Chess, f4. f4 is the correct idea. And this is going to really surprise you guys, I think. What's the eval here? Put your guesses in the chat. We'll see who gets the closest. What's the eval in this position? I would not have guessed this. Not within half a pawn. Because to me, it seems like, we kind of have a balanced position, both sides fighting for space. Pieces well placed on both sides. Oh, wow, the guesses are all over the place. 1.3 for white, -3, -0.9, -3.6, -2, -1.5, just because of Matt's hints, -4.7, -2.1. The funny thing in stats, there's like the law of averages, where a lot of times the group consensus is pretty good. I think we're close. As a group, we're pretty close. The eval is -1. So black is already up here, 1 point advantage. Smithy Q is saying pi, out to 7 digits or so. Pawn to f4 is the top move. This is the way we're going to crack this extended triangle position. And it's very similar to what we just looked at. Now, white plays knight to f3. And the idea here is white wants to prevent pawn to g5. Tim, 6.12 times 10 to the negative 23rd. So white wants to prevent this pawn to g5, pawn to g4 plan. And white also might be thinking, could they play knight g5 and stick their knight on e6 at some point? Now bishop to h6 played in the game, defending this g5 push. Pawn to h6 was also a good move. Rook a to e1 played by white, and you can see the question mark here. This was a mistake. The best move for black, pawn to g5. We just saw it in the last example. This is the way to attack the extended triangle. Bishop to c1. And now here's the next quiz question for you guys. What is black's best move here? And the reason I ask this question is because sometimes our natural instinct isn't always the top move, and we need to calculate it out and figure out why and be precise. So we can have these rules in mind. But chess is such a intricate game. There's so many little nuances in every position that you can't always just plow ahead with the plan you have in mind. And if you kind of pick up on my hints, what I'm trying to say here is pawn to g4 immediately isn't the strongest move, even though that's what we really would like to play at some point. So the top move, Thomas got it correct. Queen to h5. But let's show first pawn to g4 why this isn't quite as strong. Still an advantage for black, but we're looking at a 1.3 instead of a 2.6. So we lost about half of our stockfish advantage. Knight to h4 can be played. And now there's this nasty pin along the diagonal. So there's no pawn to f3 because white can simply take here. And if we take the bishop, they take the pawn back. White's up a pawn and we don't really have any attack in this position. So that's why we don't want to rush into g4, because we put this bishop here and it just makes that position a little bit different. We can't get away with it with the f3 move. So the best move is queen to h5. G takes f played in the game. And here g4 was played. That's not the strongest move though. The strongest move is g takes f4. And now we have this wide open g file. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. You know, should the white king be safe? Because there are pieces around the king, right? What makes the black king safer than the white king? Because the black king is quite a bit safer here. Not only is it because there's extra black pieces nearby, for example, this queen, this bishop, but it's due to the space. Look at these white pieces on the queen side. How difficult is it for them to shift over to the king side compared to our pieces? Much more difficult. So what black should have played here was g takes f4. And let's say king h1, king h8, rook g1, rook g8. We're both trying to make our kings as safe as possible. This eval is already minus 4.5. Black is completely winning here. And the plan is black wants to play c4. That was Ethan's idea from earlier. Shut down the queen side. We'll make this all about the king side. So we eliminate that queen side kind of risk. Eliminate that counterplay by white. And then shift everything king side. And the idea of, for example, knight g4 and maybe even knight takes h2 followed by a rook lift and the other rook coming over is almost unstoppable. So minus 4.5, completely winning for black. Black should win this game. And this all came out of that extended triangle structure right here after white played pawn to e4. So very quickly, you can blow your opponent off the board if you get this sort of structure. All right, let's go to game number 4. Wayward chess, it was just due to tactics, kind of counting up the material with each move. So in this one, we are looking at a Queen's Indian defense. Black just moved the bishop back. And question for the chat, do you notice anything about Black's pawn formation? Thanks, Thomas. what do we notice about black's pawn formation? And like I talked about in the last one, this is something that I had thought about quite a bit because I play the Catalan for white, and I get a lot of positions very similar to this exact setup. There's something in black's position. Yes, wayward chess, that's correct. It's the extended triangle. Take note of this, guys. Extended triangle. But now it's on the queen side. We just looked at the extended triangle on the king side. Now we have a queen side extended triangle. So we got to think about, how do we break the queen side extended triangle? Well, let's start with gaining some space. Why is it called the extended triangle? I think the triangle is if the pawns are like this, is the idea. I think. But then this pawn is up. I believe that's why it's called the extended triangle. But white in the game plays pawn to b4. And if you were to give white an extra move, now there's the option of playing c5 or c takes d. You don't want to give white all the play in this position. Yeah, PD Wrath, Dennis, that's exactly right. We gain space and we're getting ready to attack this extended triangle. We're going to flip the board now. We have the extended triangle. What's the best move for black? Put your answers in the chat. What is the best move for black in this position? And you got to go back to thinking dynamically. Right? We don't want to allow white to just run us over. So not only do we need to think about these things like minority attack, pushing the F pawn for the extended triangle, pushing the C pawn for the extended triangle. Sometimes we're on the other side of these positions and we got to know how to fight back. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of good answers in the chat. This is awesome. A5, super strong move. It's a minus 0.05. So black is pretty much holding equality. Very close to that eval is pawn to c5, and that's what was played in the game. And the move that nobody mentioned, even though Stockfish doesn't complain too much, but I think practically for a normal human player, not a Magnus Carlsen, knight b to d7 I think is a practical mistake. Even though Stockfish doesn't cry about this move, it allows pawn to c5. And in this position, the only move to fight for equality is a5. But I don't recommend that you go against this structure because this is going to be way easier to play for white than black. Trying to fight with the a pawn and these pawns still back, this does not look fun for black. So the move played in the game, and I think it deserves an exclamation point, is pawn to c5. You immediately fight back in the center. Don't allow white to get c5 in against our extended triangle here. So now the game went b takes, d takes, bishop takes. The dust starts to settle. This position is dead equal, and the problem is solved for black. So now we've kind of seen how to attack the extended triangle and a resource to not allow the opponent to attack the extended triangle. Let's go to the next game. We got another Botvinnik game. He's playing the white pieces. And now we're going to look at the King's Indian defense in particular. Black here plays pawn to f5. So this is a very common move in the King's Indian defense. And I can tell you, when I was a young player, I was always afraid of these f-pawn pushes. They're scary, right? You don't want to see f4 coming by black at the wrong moment, and then the g-pawn push, and you just get steamrolled like we've seen in some examples, right? Black gets kingside space, and they just run you over. There's a name for this method. Botvinnik is playing the white pieces. It's called the Botvinnik's method. Yes, Duhong has it right. There's an idea here from Botvinnik. We want to play pawn to f4, but the timing has to be right. Titus knows this too. Okay, very good. You guys are kind of onto this already. So the Botvinnik method is to first take the pawn. Black takes back, and then pawn to f4. So I want you guys to remember this. This is the pawn structure. We have a King's Indian defense, right? These pawns for black, these pawns for white. Black plays f5. What we want to do is take f5. Black takes back and play pawn to f4. It's not the only way to play the position, but it's a simple way to remember this position and play it. Titus, you can also play pawn to f4 here. It's not a bad move. This is pretty much holding equality as well. But the Botvinnik method is to take f5 first, and then f4. Okay, so now in the game, black played knight takes d3. This is Boleslavsky playing the black side. Botvinnik plays queen takes, pawn to e4. And this is something we're going to talk about in the next examples too. This pawn tension can be relieved either by taking or pushing. In this case, black pushes. And the stockfish eval is still close to equal, but this is going to be easier to play for white from a human versus human perspective. Queen d2 played, and white's going to work around this e-pawn. Queen f6, rook f2, putting an extra defender on this pawn just because we see these lined up. And now, after bishop to d7, there's a simple plan here for white. White wants to play bishop to d4, knight d1, knight e3, a3, b4. Now, all those moves aren't immediately playable. For example, the d4 square is not accessible currently by the bishop, but white has time to maneuver, right? These are just plans for white. And if you look at the plans for black, black is kind of stuck here. So I think human versus human, this is already easier to play for white. So this is how to use Botvinnik's method to kind of take that initiative that black had, change the structure, and then start to play with straightforward plans. Because this whole lesson's on middle game planning. This allows you to have concrete plans in your mind. Whereas like if we look at this position, even though f4 is a good move here, I think it's very hard to just all of a sudden have concrete plans now. Yes, Mindy Q, that's right. Black's knight doesn't have an easy path to get into the center. So let's look at that position again. That knight on e8 is a pretty bad piece. I thought there was another question, but I don't see it now. So that's Botvinnik's method. All right, let's go to the next game. We reach this position. Guess what black plays? Pawn to f5. Now here what I want you guys to do is list the imbalances in the chat. We're not talking about imbalances every single position, but you should really think about them every position. But list the imbalances in the chat. What are we looking at here? We have a really good turnout today, by the way. 35 people, 35 viewers, 23 likes. Yeah, space on different sides. That's right. Space, space, development, bishops in particular. White has a bad light square bishop. Yeah, that is a bad piece right now. So next question. What's the plan for white? PD Wrath is saying pawn to f3. This is one I want you to be careful with. Pawn to f3, there is pawn to f4. And now we get a very cramped kingside position. So even though Stockfish isn't complaining too much, I wouldn't recommend that one for white. Pawn to f4, Thanos is saying. h3, g4, queenside expansion with pawn to b4. Knight takes c5. So I want you guys to think about what we just talked about, Botvinnik's method. We want to get pawn to f4 in after e takes f5. Yeah, that's right, Tim. So what we can start with, e takes f5, g takes f5, and now here you could play f4 right away, just as good as what was played in the game. But here, Botvinnik, or this wasn't Botvinnik, sorry. These are two players I haven't heard of. White plays knight takes c5, knight takes c5, and now pawn to f4. So we get to execute the Botvinnik method against that King's Indian structure where black played f5. So in this case, black takes the pawn. So we get to look at a different example here. Bishop takes f4. And now looking at the pawn structure, we have an isolated pawn for black. And even though the computer is saying equal here, we have to think in terms of humans, playing humans, and imbalances. This position, in my opinion, looks much tougher to play from the black side. So the computer is just saying, yeah, I can hold any weakness that black has here with an equal position. But as a human, this is going to be tough. Steve, that's a really good question. So in this position, why not rook takes f5 instead? So if we know the Botvinnik structure is coming up, why not rook takes c5? In this case, it looks like bishop to g4 is the computer move. And when the rook moves, we can take, and we get this really strong knight against the bad bishop, and black doesn't have any counterplay. It's a pretty concrete idea in that case, why black shouldn't take back with the g pawn. And the move order could change. So I think white should probably take that knight first and then do the bishop g4 stuff. So g takes f. This is close to equal. Knight takes f4. E takes, bishop takes. Tough position for black, and black immediately makes a mistake here. Plays knight d7. It was already a tough position. White plays queen to d2. And the idea here is this bishop and queen are lined up. White is looking at bishop g5 and bishop h6. This is a long game, but I just want to kind of go through and let you guys see what happens here without a lot of commentary. Knight e5, bishop h6, takes, bishop d7. Notice this king is exposed. White trades queens, right? So we're going to an endgame. Doubles on the f-file. Notice that weakest pawn. Knight e4, utilizing the pin. Harassing this rook a little bit. White orchestrates a trade of knights. Puts a third attacker on this pawn. So 3 attackers and 3 defenders on this guy. Starts to bring the king in. Also kind of hinting at some queenside play. So white definitely has the initiative here, right? White is pressing. Black is just trying to hold. King goes up all the way up to d4. This pawn is still defended by the rook, and now white plays b4. So white's expanding queenside. Swings the rook over to the open file. Creates a second target. So now black has 2 targets. You always want to add a second target when you can, because sometimes your opponent can just sit and hold the one weakness forever. Now we have a second weakness. Pawn to c5. Take. King takes. This king is getting even more active. Black is still holding for now. Oh, but then this is the critical mistake. And it's hard to see why at first glance, but rook d7, rook e7 is the critical blunder. Rook b8 played, hitting the bishop. Rook f8, doubling on the 8th rank. The rook comes back, and now the bishop pokes at this rook. It moves. Rook a7, hitting this pawn. King f6, bishop c6, and black resigns. He's completely stuck. Look at this bishop. It has no good moves. This pawn's going to drop. This pawn's about to queen. Black resigns in this position. So this all came out of the isolated pawn. That's why I wanted to show that endgame. When we had this trade, we noted this pawn was isolated in a potential weakness. Black needs to play dynamically from this position. Black cannot allow all those trades to just happen and go into that endgame. And I had a game like this recently at a tournament in Rochester where I was on the side that had a potential pawn weakness. And I was terrified for my life. Like, even though I knew that if I had a position like this from the black side, that Stockfish would say, oh yeah, you can hold this with best play, I knew I was going to lose because my opponent had all the play in the world to work around my one pawn weakness. And I did everything in my power to try to avoid getting in this type of position from the black side. Like, I would rather fight for dynamic play than suffer in a position like this if I have the chance. All right, let's go to game number 7. We have 2 games left. Okay, so we see knight d2, pawn to f5 by black. Now in this case, we're going to look at Botvinnik's method where black ends up getting connected pawns. And this is going to be a little bit better for black than what we've seen in the previous lines. So we're going to take, pawn to f4. Black takes f4. So first, we see the isolated pawn. But black has this awesome outpost, knight to e5. Rook a to e1 played. Queen f6. So notice how black is playing more dynamically in this position. Knight f3. Bishop to e7. Knight takes e5. So here, this is the strongest move for white. Knight takes e5, taking off that monster piece. If white plays a move like a3, black may take, or black may retreat this knight, applying pressure to the bishop. So white just decided, okay, I'm going to take that knight. And it is the strongest move. D takes e, bishop e3. Now in this position, the eval does very slightly favor white. It's around 0.3. But notice how black has a lot of dynamic play in the position. So we're not going to go any deeper in this game, but I just wanted to show an example of how black can still play actively against the Botvinnik method and get a position like this where it's pretty balanced in terms of the dynamics and the imbalances. All right, guys, one lesson left. One game left, I should say. Yes, MindyQ, that's a great point. Showcasing why pawn structures is useful. Pawn structures in middle games and planning, it's all very closely linked, as well as imbalances. All right, so this one, we get this position. Black plays pawn to f5. Knight e1 by white. Black goes knight f6. There's Memphis. And here we're going to see the same idea. Botvinnik method. E takes f5. G takes f. Pawn to f4. And in this game, we're going to see a different type of counterplay by black. Queen e7. Memphis camp. Queen c1. Pawn e4. So we get the passed pawn example, passed pawn idea from black. Bishop e3 by white. Now let's flip the board here. Can you tell me an interesting idea for black? It doesn't have to be your favorite move, but just give me a move in the chat. How can black fight for some counterplay here? Because we know white has some straightforward plans when our pawn gets up to e4. Right? We know that white probably wants bishop here, swing that knight into e3, and just work around this pawn. Wayward chess knight to g4 is the top engine move. I like that idea a lot. Ethan's got it too. Good way to fight for counterplay. Chess Simple says pawn to c6. Thomas says c5. Yeah, you guys are on the right track with the c pawn. Wayward chess. Wayward chess, get out of this lesson. You're getting all the answers right. You don't need it. Pawn to c5. This is a very interesting move. The computer, complains a little bit about it, drops a few tenths of a pawn. But what black is doing here is pointing these pawns queenside. Right? So white had all the queenside space here, and there was this idea a3, b4, and white's just going to steamroll us on the queenside. Pawn to c5 points our pawns queenside from the black side. So white decides to take, black takes, queen d2. We get some dynamic play on the b file. We have to defend this guy. Bishop e6, but notice how all of black's pieces are pretty well placed here. Knight c2, and now black plays c5, controlling the advanced squares for this knight. Knight b5, triple attack, and black goes d5. And I really like the style that black is playing in this game, right? c5, put all the pieces on active squares, d5, they're fighting. Queen a5 played. Now pawn to d4. Black is saying, you can have this knight because I've connected passed pawns on the 4th rank. Yeah, chess simple. It's like a coiled spring. That's exactly right. Queen takes a6, pawn to d3. Now this position is close to equal according to the computer, but I think it's just a good example of how black can fight for really nice counterplay. There's a lot of ways that white could go wrong in this position too. So even though black's down one piece currently, one piece for sure we're going to get back. And you could argue that black's pieces are probably more active than white's. These two on the queen side aren't currently doing a lot besides maybe attacking this pawn, but the action's all in the center right now. So a lot of different examples there. Hopefully that helped you guys out, kind of thinking about those different middle game positions, different pawn formations. And if it seems like a lot, it is a lot. Chess middle games are very overwhelming. There's so many different types of middle games and so many different types of positions, different plans. And then even when you think you have the rules down, there's always exceptions because you have to evaluate every position uniquely. So that's why I don't think there's a real great resource on middle game planning, but I'm hoping someday to maybe create some sort of video course. But for now, like doing these lessons and doing smaller chunks of information on middle game planning, I think is a good start. So hopefully that helps kind of cement some of those ideas into your own pattern recognition and intuition. And then you start to see these positions again and again, and it'll be like, okay, I know the Botvinnik idea. I know the extended triangle. I know the Carlsbad structure and the minority attack. I know how to fight dynamically in certain positions. The more you see these positions, the more it'll just become second nature to start to look for these ideas quickly. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about our promotion for November. And if you've seen the other live streams, there's a little twist at the end as well. So I'm going to hop back over to the other view. What we're offering for the next 3 days is 50% off everything on the ChessGoals course website. This includes the best-selling lifetime access bundle, which is normally $449. You get it for $225, half off. This gets you all 12 of our current paid courses, plus all future courses. And we have quite a few lifetime access members in the chat already. So they've gotten it at little lower prices because they paid for it earlier. But this price essentially keeps going up as we have more courses. But if you buy lifetime access, you just lock in that price and you get all the future courses included. Currently, the retail price of all of our courses is over $750. So it's $750 in value plus all the future courses. We have a Nimzo Indian for Black course that we've already recorded a couple videos. James and myself are working on that one. We have a beginner move by move course that I'm super excited about. Presta J and I have gone through 30 beginner games. And it's sort of like logical chess move by move, but it's not Grandmaster games. It's actual instructive beginner games that I selected for their instructive value. So it's going through 30 beginner games and talking about every single move. What are the ideas? So I'm super excited for that for new players. And then we'll just kind of keep having courses rolling out. I have a modern defense course I'm working on. Daniel's working on a 1G3 course. And I want to do more courses kind of like this one where we look at strategy and pawn structure and planning and those kind of topics. So not just opening courses down the line. And then some commonly asked questions for the ChessGoals courses. What do you get? Well, you get the PGN download. So that's different than, for example, Chessable, right? You can download the course on your own. We have instructions on how to upload it to Chessbase, Chess.com, Lichess. You can even upload it to Chessable as your own course and train our courses on Chessable. 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you purchase anything, including the lifetime access, and if you're not happy with it, no problem at all. I'll just refund your money. Customer support, that's primarily myself. So if you send me an email, I usually get back to you within a day. I try to be as quick as possible to help out students. You get lifetime access to whatever you purchase. So let's say you just purchased the Carol Kahn course. You get lifetime access to that course. It's a lifetime course. So when I add content to that course, alter things, improve things, you get access to all that down the road. And then we have a private Discord community for course owners, but also there's a course community. So you can ask questions within the course lessons. You can go in and ask a specific question and I answer it, and then other students can see all those questions and answers as well. So all the courses are kind of interactive in that way. And then there's also a message board within the course player as well. Okay, so if you aren't sure, like what's the quality level of these courses, we have over 3,000 course members, like we talked about in the very beginning. I did some stats. I added up all the reviews, and the average is 4.91 stars, and we're up to 90 reviews now. And if you look in the description, that's a link to our course page. It's chessgoals.com, or there's a link in the description specifically to the lifetime access. And from there, you can click explore courses if you want to see all the different ones. But now, this is the fun part. This is something new that I'm trying just for November. It's something called Assess My Chess. And what's going to happen is one randomly selected member who purchases a lifetime access bundle this month, so in the month of November, will be selected for an Assess My Chess assessment. And what happens is you fill out a form and you submit 5 games and you tell me your study habits. What are you currently doing to study your chess? And what I'll do is I'll take a fresh look. So I'll just turn my video player on, record myself and the board, and I'll do a 30-minute review of all of your recent games, record a video file that's just my first reactions, and I'll give you recommendations to help you identify areas of improvement. So it's just real quick, raw thoughts, 30 minutes, give you a video file. And this is something that's going to be included for free for the selected winner. And there's a high chance of being selected because currently there's only been 1 lifetime access sold in November. So you have a very high chance of winning. And we will have a Black Friday sale coming up, but it's not going to be as good as this offer. So this is 50% off of everything using the code FALL. The Black Friday sale is going to be 50% off lifetime access, but then it's 40% off of bundles and 30% off individual courses. So this is our best sale that we ever do, 50 off everything, and it's always linked to the live stream. Chess Simple says, lifetime access has definitely been my best chess purchase. Yeah, that's awesome. Russ says, best value in chess training for sure. Christian says, I will buy it again. I don't know if it lets you buy it twice, Christian. Any questions in the chat on this offer? It's going to be available for 3 days. And if you signed up for the class with the Google form, I'll email you this information. But if you didn't get an email, maybe screenshot this, or at least remember the code FALL. The code FALL will get you that 50% off. Tim says, thank you, Matt. Got to go. Much appreciated. Can I buy a lifetime access again to get the free session? So if you're a current lifetime access member, stay tuned for the assessment updates down the road. I'm going to see how this goes after the first one, kind of get some feedback on it. And then this might be an offering that we have in the future, or do more giveaways for lifetime access members that have already purchased lifetime access in the past. So no need to buy anything, Tim, if you're already lifetime access. Stay tuned because I'm planning on doing more with this. Smithy Q says, any suggestions for further middle game self-study? That's a great question, Smithy Q. I think going through sample games is one of the best ways to get middle game ideas down. So you can find sample games in the openings that you play. That's probably one of the best things to do. And you can do solitaire training where you try to guess what moves the players make from your side. Like I play the white side of the Catalan, let's say. I'll find Catalan games, maybe try to find ones where white wins, and then guess the moves. So you can kind of go through the middle game and figure out what were the thoughts of the player and what were my thoughts and how did they differ. Ethan's asking about pawn structure study resources. Ethan, I think honestly YouTube might be the best. Because the problem is there's not one great book, in my opinion, that kind of covers all the pawn structures. I mean, there's a few pawn books out there, but yeah, I think it's so specific to your games is the problem, right? Like there's the book by Flores, which I think is a good book on pawn structures, but it's super thick and most of the book doesn't apply to my openings because my openings will have specific pawn structures that come out of them. Just Simple saying, I would pay money just to get Matt's live reaction. Okay, I see one lifetime order just came through to Tommy. Thank you. We have 2 lifetime orders in November. But then we'll also have the Black Friday sale, so there might be a couple more that trickle in. But then I'm thinking too, as long as the student who's selected is okay with it, I want to publish the Assess My Chess just to get feedback. Maybe it's something where I tweak it a little bit, and then down the line, it could be offered as something that you can purchase individually. Any other questions before we wrap up? It can either be on courses or chess questions in general. Floor is open for Q&A. I'll switch back. Webcam only view. Matt says we'll be looking for that potential review for already current lifetime members. Yeah. This was great. One of our best turnouts for a live stream. And I'll be doing another poll, I think, for what we want to look at for a December live stream. I think we'll put middle game planning in the running again just to see if it wins. But we had quite a few votes for all the other topics last time too. I'm going to pull it up right now. We had rook endgames, middle game planning, pawn structures, creating an opening repertoire and calculation. So pawn structures, opening repertoire, and calculation were all 17 to 20%. Rook endgames got last with 12%. So we'll probably kick out rook endgames from the poll, but if you guys have ideas, feel free to email them to me, matt@chessgoals.com, or tell me on Discord or wherever. Because I want to do another one of these polls to figure out what do you guys want to see in the December session. Thanks, Michael. Great session. Yep. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think that's one of the nice things about our live stream so far is it's a manageable size where I can still easily read all the questions and then hopefully answer them or show them on the board as well. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, Dennis. I'll probably see you guys both on Tuesday night. Ethan, make sure to bring your games and put them in Lead Chess or a chess.com library or have your PGNs ready. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Chess Simple. All right. Thanks, everybody. So remember, if you're interested in any products, use the code FALL, 50% off of everything. I think You will get an email as long as you signed up in advance with that information as well. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will do a poll for the next one, so stay tuned. You'll get that in an email, and it'll be on the YouTube community page. Give me your suggestions too. What do you want to see? Or if you have improvements, just like the general class format. Interested in hearing that too. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your day. See you later.